On a more positive note, what are the things we should do? The first one that a lot of people are good at, and women tend to be better at it than men, to be honest, is sharing their feelings, sharing how you're doing, sharing your emotions. And the reason for that is it sort of lets a lot of this stuff out. I'm very much like I see things or whatever, but if you think of this as sort of a big bucket of bubbling, kind of boiling over water, and the bad stuff's bubbling up to the top and the good stuff's down still at the bottom, the bad stuff has to find its way out. And the way it finds its way out is when we keep getting it out of us, right? And you may find yourself telling the same story over and over again, or you may find yourself saying the same thing over and over again. But that means that's kind of where you're stuck, in quotes. That's kind of what you need to process right now, and that's okay. For those that find talking about it difficult, or for those maybe who would like to talk but don't really have someone that they can talk with and someone who they maybe trust to respond to that, then journaling or writing is very, very useful. And you can do this in many, many forms. This one, I think, is extremely effective. If you haven't done something like this, you might want to consider it, because I have found for various therapeutic ways to use this, but I mean, it could take on the form where you just write down the life story of the person who died, and maybe that would help you, just starting wherever you want. Maybe it's from beginning to end. Maybe it's in a trip you took. Other people find that if they just write whatever they're thinking, that they just sort of have a stream of consciousness and it just goes and they just write like that. Whatever it is, even an exercise that I do with people, if there's some guilt or there's something else that they want to try to resolve with the person who has died, this sounds crazy, but just hear me out through both of these things. But a lot of times what people will suggest, and I've done with people, is to ask them to write a letter to the deceased person and sort of explaining whatever it is that you're trying to that you wanted to communicate, as if the person were sort of sitting here with us. And that's a very effective technique unto itself. But often the second part of this is if you do that letter and you write it yourself and then you wait about 2, 3, 4 weeks or something like that afterwards, then you write a letter back from the deceased person to you addressing those things, it's extremely powerful. And I had a man who felt so guilty about certain things when his mom died, and he thought I was nuts, I'm sure, when I suggested doing this exercise. And he called me up one day really excited, and he came in and he read this, and it was the most touching thing I've ever been through. But how his letter to his mother and then his version, right, of her reply back to him was just so freeing to him that it just took all the guilt away. I mean, and I never in a million years could have talked him out of that, because it was really, he needed his mom to talk him out of it, or his mom to free him from that. So writing can be very, very effective. Counseling, obviously I have to put a plug in for people that do this, but I mean, basically, the one point I want to make to you about counseling is there's 2 points, I guess. One is that there are loads of counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, all have a role in all these different mental health issues, whether we have an illness or we have certain problems going on, like a death in the family. One thing you should look for is when you're talking with a person, if you say, you know what, I just don't like them. Counseling, a lot of it is about whether you have a good rapport with the person that you're dealing with and whether you trust that they're helping you. So don't feel too bad, or don't feel bad at all if you, in your head, just say, this isn't working, and you just tell them, I'm going to need to find another counselor. That's okay. We don't take that personally. We recognize that people need to find the person who's really right for them. The next item here is reading. A lot of times people will ask me, well, what book should I read? What book would you recommend that I read? And I may surprise them, I don't know, but I usually tell them I'd rather you didn't. And then they say, oh, come on, And let me tell you why I tell them that first. Because, like we said before, the brain and the heart, reading really addresses the intellect. It really is something that you read a book on how to grieve properly. But the reality is, I can tell you all that like this, and I can help you with some pointers, but the book isn't going to help your heart feel better. The book isn't going to help you miss the person less. All right? So if you're going to read books, the best kind would be more or less about a person who found themselves in a similar situation to you. Like, so-and-so lost their child, and I lost my child, and so when I read about how they made it, it gave me some confidence I can make it. That's different. That's not like the how-to. Someone asked me one time, why don't you write The Idiot's Guide to Grieving or something? But that's really not what it's about, right? We live in a society where everything is like instantaneous. It's all internet solutions for everything. But that's not the solution to this. The solution to this is really experiencing the fact that I really miss the person and helping yourself move forward based on bringing them and that feeling and that memory along with us. Physical exercise, I said before, is very useful. Prayer, meditation, yoga, anything that maybe kind of gets in touch with your more spiritual side or kind of centers you, quiets you. I mean, other than basically grieving people like quiet. They like, most of the time, they're much more, liking it quiet, lower lighting, et cetera, et cetera. So anything to do to sort of center yourself that way is useful. And then some people like art, music, et cetera. But this whole idea of noise, and I think I have on another slide, that people are overly sensitive to noise and to light and things like that. And so what we find is that people who live in an environment, like a young mom who maybe their spouse dies or something with 2 little kids, that's torture. I mean, besides the whole grieving thing, which is bad enough, then they have this heightened sense of, it's almost like everything is amplified, and yet they can't get away from it because kids are by nature noisy and, things like that. Okay, so you might find that doing something like art and music or something to quiet yourself, will be very useful.